life is not linear. There is no perfect blueprint that you can copy paste.
It always kind of comes down to, what do you truly want to say yes to? And what do you truly want to say no to?
Life is nonlinear. It's messy. It's chaotic. It keeps on surprising you in good and bad ways.
That's what we came here to do, right? We came here to be alive, not just go through the fucking motions, but to actually taste life.
Blanking out like this on stage, this was the thing that would keep me up at night before a talk. And then it happened. You don't know what your life is going to end up looking like. Nobody knows. But you will end up being successful in your own completely unique way.
Real talk, real wisdom. All heart, all in. This is the Roxanne Show. Anne-Laure, I'm so excited. Congratulations. I saw today on your Instagram that Spotify had you as, was it like the top 5%, one of the most shared audiobooks, Tiny Experiments? Yeah.
Yes, I shared on my Instagram because as I mentioned, I was really anxious about recording the audiobook because English is not my first language. I have an accent and I thought, maybe that's fine to just have conversations and do podcasts, but 6 hours of listening to me with my French accent, maybe people will hate it, but apparently people like it. So I'm really happy.
I love your voice. I love your accent. And honestly, your book is incredible. I discovered your book, I feel like earlier on, and then I listened to you on a podcast soon after that. And, there's a lot of parallels in our work and our messaging. I mean, first and foremost, curiosity. In my email signature, it says stay curious. Before we started recording, I told you I didn't do great in school, right? Because I don't do great in institutionalized places. But I'm such a curious human. I've always been. I'm an artist. I love exploring, topics that I'm interested in, but there's a vast amount of topics. So neuroscience, philosophy, biology, poetry. And so, curiosity has been a big through line, a sort of superpower, and has really allowed me to live on this path of self-discovery versus, being in this constant sort of battle with myself, judging myself. And which is not to say I haven't had moments like that. I call that the decade of the 20s. I think like it was like, there's a lot, there's a lot more sort of judgment that comes through in those decades. But that certainly is you are such a strong, powerful voice and leader in this space of curiosity. And really, I think you're shifting culture by inviting individuals to lead their lives with more curiosity. And I think what's so special about your work, there's a lot of things, and I'm excited to go into any territory that we feel curious to lead us into. But I really love this part. And Laura, I feel like what you do is you give individuals an invitation to be more fucking human, because when we can be more curious, we're actually allowing ourselves to be more compassionate, even if one doesn't realize it. But you really are. It's like you're inviting individuals to give themselves more space and not just be more self-critical and beating themselves up all the time.
Yeah, I find it really interesting what you mentioned about not being good in school despite being curious, or maybe because you were curious.
Yes.
And it really shows the relationship that we have with our curiosity as kids and how that changes as we become adults based on what society is expecting from us. And in a lot of environments, in a lot of jobs, in a lot of situations, curiosity is almost seen as a distraction. If you want to be productive, you need to have a very clear idea of what you want to achieve, a clear vision, a clear goal, and then work really, really hard to get there. But we're not really encouraged to make space for just exploring without really having a goal, without knowing exactly where we want to go, maybe without really knowing who we are in that moment and who we want to become. This is not really something that is encouraged. And a lot of my work is around that, around telling people it's not only okay to be uncertain, to be curious, to have more questions than you have answers. It's not only okay, it is actually a very powerful way to discover what you want in life.
I totally agree. I feel like so much of your work has actually validated my entire life, to be honest. Like you'll see what I mean as we go through some parts of the conversation that I'd like to explore with you. You know, one great example to start with is you have this linear path versus the experimental path or mind, right? I have it through my own lexicon and sort of, so I've been writing my whole life. That's important to say. And of course it starts as being a diarist, but it's very introspective, very, where I'm like philosophizing with myself and with life. Right. And again, I'm 47. So this has been a long time of doing this writing. And what I have come to understand mostly about myself, but also kind of thinking about life in general and these paths and where I think our work intersects in a beautiful way is I call it the scenic route versus the paved path. But
Nice.
it's so fun for me to now have someone like yourself where I can present these ideas because you immediately, your smile tells me, oh my gosh, I get it. I'd love for you to talk about the linear path versus the experimental mind or path and how the linear path actually can become more of a problem than, helpful to an individual in life.
The linear path is basically the path we're told to follow if we want to be successful in life. The idea is that there are certain steps that you're supposed to go through in a certain order in order to be successful. So you have specific milestones, and that could be, going to university, graduating, getting your first job, and then you apply for your first promotion. You work on your first big project. Maybe you meet someone, you fall in love, you get married, get a dog first, or maybe start with a plant, then a dog, then a kid, get a house, etc., etc. And so that's the linear path where you're really supposed to, it's a sequence of steps, almost like a blueprint, where we're being told if you copy paste this recipe, you will be successful. And anyone who's been on this planet Earth for more than 5 minutes will know that it doesn't really work like that. Life is not linear. There is no perfect blueprint that you can copy paste. There are no perfect steps that are guaranteed to work if you apply them. Life is non-linear. It's messy. It's chaotic. It keeps on surprising you in good and bad ways. And so what I really advocate for in the book and in all of my work really is to switch from that linear mindset, clinging to this illusion of certainty and this artificial recipe we're trying to apply, letting go of that, and instead applying what I call an experimental mindset. And an experimental mindset is more akin to treating life not like a blueprint, but like a laboratory where you can experiment, you can try new things.
Yes.
Crucially, you have no idea what's going to work and what's not going to work. But that's part of the fun. That's part of the adventure. Mm-hmm. You don't try to be certain. You don't try to know the answer. You start from a question. You might have a bit of a hypothesis. You're wondering, might I maybe like that? Is that the kind of job that I would enjoy? Is that the kind of relationship that I would like? Is that the kind of city where I would like to live? And then you can experiment. You can try new things. You can observe the result. And then based on that, you can keep on iterating. And the promise here is that you don't know what your life is going to end up looking like. Mm-hmm. Nobody knows. Anyone who tells you they know is lying. You don't know. But you will end up being successful in your own completely unique way.
And this speaks to my heart so deeply in so many ways, because first of all, I mean, it really allows for more, several values and attributes that matter to me. So agency, courage, trust. This is really how we can learn to trust ourselves. And and all of that really allows you to be more free as an individual, to really create a life where, like you said, it's a life that truly belongs to you. It has your fucking name on it, not anybody else's, And my core value number one is freedom, right? And so it's so important for me to constantly be investigating, not from a place of judgment, but from like real curiosity. Does this next move, like, where is this coming from? Does this matter to me? Or is this something that I think will be good for X, whatever, fill in the blank? What's interesting, and I'm so curious to what you'll say about this, is when we think about how most all of us, society, grooms us to, like, as we're being brought up to the first question: what do you want to be when you grow up? Okay. Yeah. Not even who, like your character, what? So we're already like, what's the label that's going to define you, that's going to put your value into, like, and define your success. And then you go into that linear path, right? That you just beautifully laid out. And if you are someone who is going to lead with more curiosity, let's just say me, we're going to use me. In fact, it's actually the perfect example. While I always had direction, I was always following what I felt was lighting me up. And when I would do that, it didn't always look good on paper. It certainly didn't make sense in a lot of ways to, maybe family or anybody, but it made sense to me in the moment. So I just went for it. I've lived around the world, etc. But what I am curious to what you have to say about this is it really almost becomes a form of rebellion because it can almost seem, and in fact, I would say, I think it does sort of equate to you're being irresponsible if you're not someone who is super specific, clear, following this path. Like, I think times are changing. And that's why I also believe that your voice is so important. Your work that you put out is so important, but it really is, there's a contention with this idea of leading your life with more curiosity and more flexibility to be more discoverable versus, no, you should know, you should go, and it's a done deal. And that's how we matter in life.
Yeah. And even in people, I've noticed, even in people who are very curious, very adventurous, who feel more comfortable with trying new things and keeping their options open and not really trying to cling onto the first answer. This is a conversation that keeps on happening where they tell me there's a lot of external pressure. And that pressure is not necessarily evil or, people trying to make you conform or trying to fit into a box. It really doesn't come from that place. It really comes from a place of worry often. Yep. It might be your parents who really would feel better and would sleep better at night if they knew that you had a stable job with a salary at a well-known company and where they could feel like, okay, my job is done. My kid is going to be okay. It can be your spouse, your partner, it can be your friends. It doesn't come from a bad place. But again, it's because and I think this is why it's so important. This is why I have these kinds of conversations. I have this conversation with you right now. This is why I wrote a book and I'm writing a newsletter. I think it's very important to make those alternative models of success, those nonlinear experimental models of success visible. You need to have examples out there so people can see that it is actually possible to be happy, to be fulfilled, to be successful in a non-conventional way.
Totally. I so agree with that. It's almost like and this is where almost the rebellion, it's like you have to it's not, let me prove it to you, but it is to say that and this is another thing that I think your work does so beautifully or invites an individual into is self-leadership. you're really
Yeah.
leading the way, right? So you're not following along, which is not, it's not this thing where you're just trying to disagree. It's really, you're trying to stay autonomous. You're trying to be a sovereign individual who came here to experience life and not just follow along, right?
Yeah, and I'm curious if this is something that happens to you too, but with a lot of the people I've worked with, and I've noticed that in myself as well. I've noticed that there is almost a perfect correlation between my sense of spaciousness, my mental health, and how much I experiment, how comfortable I am trying new things. And if I'm anxious, depressed, stressed, or if there's something that's not going well in my personal life, there is often a temptation to then want to regain control in the rest of your life and wanting to stick to a routine, wanting to kind of be able to predict what's going to happen next, wanting to feel like you have a plan, that you know what you're doing. And so this is also why I think it's impossible to talk about how to design your life, how to design your career in isolation.
Mm.
You have to think about your relationships. You have to think about your mental health. You have to think about your emotional health. You have to make space for connecting with yourself, for listening to what's going on inside, for this sense of, this self curiosity, self inquiry,
Yes.
really. If you
Yes.
want to make sure that you give yourself that space to really, really explore, really experiment, and not go back to the default mode of making decisions, which can feel really reassuring, but
Yeah.
which is not conducive to really designing the life you want.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's so easy to just stay in those loops and those patterns because it's like the safety mechanism. It's a survival tactic, right? For most all of us, if we find ourselves in that space. But I think I love this, and I think that it brings to my mind so metacognition, thinking about your thinking, self awareness, which I often I think it's really strong to share with you. I talk about self-awareness a lot because you can't make any changes in life without self-awareness, right? It's not the only part, but it is the foundational part, right? So but it's a hard sell, meaning we live in a society where, more fast, better, like this is what most people want. And self-awareness is not this. It's not this sexy Instagram. I can hang it on my wall. I could put it in, I could drive it. I could sleep with it. I could wear it. But it impacts every fucking aspect of our life. And so, when I love that when you mention, you can't think about your whole career plan like in isolation. It's really this holistic approach. I think when I kind of, where I go from there is how do we become more self-aware so that we can look at our life from more of this holistic sort of viewpoint to then be more discerning about, what matters to us and what doesn't, and what we want to explore more and what we want to maybe eliminate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I want to start with something that I would recommend for people, because I think there is there's always an issue when, like, when you're someone who's used to practicing metacognition in your life, either through journaling, through any kind of self-awareness exercise, etc. There's you can fall into the trap of giving advice to people that assumes that they're at the same level,
Mhm.
when a lot of people, it's not necessarily that it's harder, but they just don't have the time, the mental space. They haven't, really even tried journaling or anything like that in the past. So something that I like recommending to people who have never really created any kind of metacognitive practice in the past is to do something, a little exercise that I call self-anthropology.
Mm.
And the reason why I call it like that is that it's an invitation to pretend just for 24 hours that you are an anthropologist with your own life as your topic of study. And so it's not about going straight from journaling every morning or having a weekly review, all of those things are great. And I highly recommend actually building those habits long term. But if you want to go from 0 to 1, just try something, 24 hours. And again, pretend you're an anthropologist. Really picture it. What does an anthropologist do? They have their little notebook and they go in the field and they take field notes. And what's really important about the way an anthropologist does their job is that they don't judge. They just take little notes. They observe. And they ask questions like, why do these people do things like that? Why do they care so much about that? Why do they spend so much time and energy on that specific activity? Why do they do things in that specific order? And they just take notes. They observe. They ask those kind of questions, again, in a completely non-judgmental way. Mm-hmm. And so you can do the very same thing with your life, 24 hours. And you can take your notes on your phone in the little notebook, whatever works for you. You have a little Post-it note next to your computer and take notes. When do you get excited? When are you tired? What kind of meeting? Are there meetings where you finish the meeting and you're so full of energy, feeling so excited and you can't, wait to keep on working on this project? Or are there moments when all you want to do is go and hide and cry in the corner because you hate being here? All of this is really interesting data that you can use to better understand what works and what doesn't work in your life. And that can be a great starting point for someone who hasn't had really the space or the time to practice metacognition in the past.
It's so good. It's so practical. It's a right here, right now tool. And I think that is so valuable because you're right. As someone who leads journaling challenges, journaling is a big part of my life, obviously personally and in my work. And I have seen the transformation that definitely comes through when someone can really stick to the practice. But here's what I've also seen is how intimidating it can be. Oh, right. You've seen it too. It's like, and I understand as someone who's done, there's a lot of reasons why it can seem so intimidating, but what you just shared is really, it's one part to, I think, how you approach all of your work, what you share, like this morning's newsletter, which I love your newsletter and I suggest everybody fucking sign up for it. But you wrote about, because I can hear you talking through the writing, is, asking yourself questions. And here's the thing. I have noticed in my coaching and my mentorship, and it's an observation, it's not a judgment, is that people stop short so often because they have a harder time going deeper for a lot of reasons. And many of which I'm very empathetic to. I understand it takes a lot of guts. It's fucking scary to go deeper, but with the practice, self-anthropologist, becoming a self-anthropologist, with that practice you just shared with your newsletter, the self-curiosity, asking yourself some questions, and they don't even have to be deep. Like the questions that you just, put out there, it's more of like self-diagnostics, right? Like just, right? Like, and just getting, and really it's like looking at life from, like you said, the laboratory. I like to think of myself as a student of life. That is not, we hear that a lot, but like to really be a student, you have to be willing to be more curious and investigative versus judging. I want to actually put this, I'm curious to what you'll say about this. Years ago, I was journaling in an airport and I had this fucking mic drop moment with myself. It's like I'm channeling and this came through me. You cannot be learning and judging at the same time. You cannot be learning and judging at the same time. And it was for me, Anne-Laure, I was like, holy fuck. Like, it was like, oh, what did you just, and for me, it's such a simple truth where it's like, you can't do both at the same time, right? What do you think about that?
It's so interesting because, I'm sorry, I'm going to look at this as a scientist.
Yes,
because
please do.
That's what I thought about immediately. This is one of the first things that we learn when we're trained as scientists is that you cannot collect your data and analyze it at the same time. The reason why is because if you start poking at the data in the middle of collecting it, it will be so tempting to start forming your interpretation already, or it's feeling like, oh, I don't like what I'm seeing. Let's stop this experiment. This is not, so that's why when you run an experiment, you say, I'm going to collect this data, I'm going to try this thing, and I'm going to withhold judgment until I'm done collecting the data. And then I'll analyze the data. And I feel like it's not exactly the same as what you said, but it rhymes in the sense that it's really about having a phase where you're just a sponge and you're getting all of the experience, and some of it will be uncomfortable, some of it will not make sense, but you're just absorbing it all and you're just living.
Yeah.
And then there's a phase for processing, for digesting everything you just ingested, for integrating it.
Yeah.
And you cannot do both of them at the same time, but you need both in life. And I think really living a rich, full life is being able to go through those phases, almost like a little dance where you're absorbing and you're living and you're experiencing, and then you're processing and integrating.
That's so good. What I feel that you, and just learning a bit about you, that you grew up as a very high performing, driven woman, right? I would go as far to say that I certainly fucking am. I think a lot of people who listen or watching this, show, this episode are also. What was the biggest? How does one maintain drive? And I love being a high performing, momentous woman. How do we maintain that drive and that desire to execute strongly, effectively, and still be open, allow ourselves to be more of that self-anthropologist, to be more curious? I mean, maybe even in your personal life, like, how did you allow more for basically for both to coexist? If, by the way, if you even associate yourself with a high-performing, driven woman. That was my assumption and not necessarily.
Yeah, no, it's funny when you say that, because I would probably not use those words to describe myself, but I think it's more of a cultural thing where I feel like in the US, I've heard more people say that. I think if I said that in France, my friends would all laugh. I mean, we just don't say those kind of things. So that's why I think for anyone watching the video, my face was probably a bit like, what do I think about that? But I did have a very successful career quite early on. And I think to answer your question about how do you make that sustainable, to me, it's all about what is the fuel behind that drive, behind that success. And from the outside, you might think that I am the same kind of high performing person I was at the beginning of my career, except that I have pivoted in terms of what I'm studying. I used to be in tech, working at Google and in startups, and now I'm in neuroscientific research. And I did a PhD, I'm doing a postdoc. And so I think on paper, it might look like those are kind of like similarly A-type kind of careers. What has changed for me, what has completely changed, is the internal experience. The fuel, the source of motivation is not the same at all anymore. It used to be very externally driven. I was very worried about pleasing the people around me, making my parents happy and proud, and just thinking about what people around me would think in terms of my colleagues. And so picking my projects based on what was the most impressive, what was the most likely to give me access to the next ladder in terms of promotions at work. And nowadays, I'm driven mostly by, and obviously this is my favorite topic to talk about, but it's true, so it's going to sound meta, but I'm mostly driven by curiosity. So I constantly ask myself, why am I interested in this project? And it requires actually a lot of work and constant, which is one of your favorite topics, self-awareness, in the sense that to this day, despite the fact that I study curiosity, I study self-anthropology, I study all of that. So you would think that I'm one of the most equipped to realize when I'm falling into those traps of making decisions based on what people will think instead of what I want to do. But we've been wired this way. We're social animals, right? So it does take this constant work of paying attention and asking myself, why do I want to do this? And so this year, for example, I had several opportunities, really cool projects that I could have worked on. And after having this little conversation with myself, I realized that I was not actually excited about those projects. And the only reason why I initially felt like I had to say yes was because it would have looked really impressive on my CV, but I wasn't actually really curious about working on that. So constantly questioning the source of motivation, what is your fuel, and making sure that that fuel is actually a sustainable source of fuel.
So good. You speak and so many things come to my mind and my heart. I have this it's oversimplified. So let me just say that first. One of the other sort of topics that I speak about, I write about, because it's at the center of everything for me, is your authentic self. And the authentic self is very complex. I am very much someone who believes that, it's not even a belief. It's like, we are always evolving. It's like, we're not one fucking thing. You know what I mean? But my simple way of kind of, well, what's your authentic self? Like, well, for me, it always kind of comes down to, what do you truly want to say yes to? And what do you truly want to say no to? And the truly part is really interesting, because that you have to explore, like, what is really true, because it could be really easy, just again, from we're wired this way, survival. Well, this feels true for me because, if I say yes to this, it's going to make everything easy. But is it really a true yes for you, or vice versa with the no? I've heard you speak about the authentic self and your interpretation around, just how the authentic self is always evolving. But I'd love for you to speak to that in this moment.
I love your definition because I think a lot of people are making themselves miserable trying to find a definition of the authentic self that is this kind of imaginary, ideal person that is never changing, like their true self, something that apparently is there and it is just their actual self, which I don't think exists, because I agree with you. Who we are keeps on evolving, and that's a really good thing. Life would be really, really sad if you were able to look 5 years in the future and know exactly who that person is going to be, who you're going to become. It's part of the beauty of life to be able to look back and feel like, wow, I can't believe how far I've come. I can't believe how much I've changed. So it is really about having those regular check-ins with yourself to ask yourself, what is the most authentic decision, the most aligned decision right now in this moment based on who I am today, number one. And number two, always stretching that a little bit, because there's also a danger in always trying to align your decisions with who you are exactly in this moment and not considering how you might want to change, how you might want to grow, how you might want to evolve. This is why I always talk about having an experimental mindset, because it really is an encouragement to try new things without committing to them for the rest of your life. And so, for example, let's say you're interested in writing. This is not really something you've done. And by writing, I mean, in this case, writing publicly, sharing your thoughts, your ideas with other people. You're not quite sure. Am I a writer or not? I don't think you have to solve that question, that problem yet. You don't have to ask yourself, am I authentically speaking? Am I a writer? Is that my true self? No, you can ask yourself, am I curious enough to find out, to actually give it a try? Yes, then give it a try. And what's great is that once you've started experimenting with it, you can keep on observing your responses and how you feel. And based on that, you can decide to keep going, to tweak your approach, or to stop writing if that's not your thing. That's completely fine. And in that entire process, you stayed authentically aligned to who you are in that moment while giving yourself space to evolve.
It's so good. Do you have obviously you have frameworks and methodologies, but in your personal life, if you find yourself in a moment where you, like, for example, you said there were a couple of projects that, you decided, I'm not really curious about this. Is there an actual process? Do you go to your journal, or do you mirror talk, or do you do it all?
Um, I journal every morning,
Yeah.
so that's number one. And this is usually a great way to start really thinking about whatever is going on. It's very interesting because sometimes I start writing about what I think is the problem I'm struggling with, and I end up writing about something else. And it really helps me realize that it's not always what feels like it's top of mind that's the actual issue at hand. Sometimes there's something underneath that is causing the friction and the challenge here. So journaling, number one, is a great way for me to have this conversation with myself. Number two, my partner, my friends, my family, I actually love that they don't work in this industry. None of them have written a book or have ever written a newsletter or been on a podcast or posted anything outside of a couple of like travels photos on their Instagram. So they're in a completely different world. Mm. And thanks to that, they're really able to look at the actual issue at hand and ignore a lot of the noise that I can sometimes make the decision feel more complicated than it actually is. Mm. And I've had amazing conversations sometimes with friends and loved ones where they would just ask me such simple questions. Yeah. Because again, no noise. So they would just cut straight to the actual issue. Yeah. And I would realize, oh, wait a second, like not necessarily, it doesn't mean I have the answer, right? But that's the question. That's the actual question I should be asking myself, not all of these other questions. So journaling and just having conversations with people you trust and who know you, and who are smart in their own ways, not like a copy of your own way of seeing the world, a different way of seeing the world.
Yeah, so powerful. That is so true. Have a strong counsel that can, that's so great. I'm curious I'm curious. I lead with that a lot.
It's good.
I know. I can't even help it. I'm like, I'm curious.
Apologize for that with me.
I'm thinking about self-complexity. So do you remember when I said, you validate my life in a lot of ways? When I first heard you speaking about that, I'm like, she's talking about me. Can you please talk about self-complexity? What is it? What do you feel the value of, self-complexity is in one's life?
So self-complexity is having several identities and identifying with several parts of your life and roles that you play in your life. Someone who has low self-complexity is basically putting all of their eggs in the same basket. We see that very often with startup founders. So they become a startup founder and that's their only identity in their entire life. And that's partly why we see such high rates of depression and chronic anxiety in startup founders when their startup fails or when the startup is not doing so well, because again, their entire identity is built on top of having a startup. So if that's not going well, their entire sense of self-worth is crumbling. On the opposite end of the spectrum, you have people who have very high self-complexity. And that means that, yes, you can see yourself as a startup founder, but maybe you also see yourself as a good friend, as a spouse, a partner, a great cook. Maybe you see yourself as a hiker, a traveler, a writer, a painter, coffee aficionado, whatever it is. You have all of those different identities, which means that if one of them is not doing well, so let's say you see yourself as a great dad and your kid just turned 14 or 15 and they don't want to talk to you anymore. So you don't feel like a great dad right now, but you're doing great in your job, or you just I don't know, you're doing great at rock climbing or whatever that other thing is that is part of your identity. You will feel better overall. So research shows that having high self-complexity having all of these different identities in your life is going to really help you in terms of mental health and resilience over the course of your life.
How does one start to become more self-complex in in a very, authentic way?
I think hobbies are a great place to start because they're a low pressure way to
Wait, what was
explore
it? I didn't hear it.
hobbies, like having different hobbies.
Oh, hobbies.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So whether it's creative hobbies or like more like physical things like exercise or whatever that is. Um, I don't know why my mind went there, but I just thought about an article I saw recently where you see so many people who now introduce themselves as saying, I'm a runner because they love running. But it's great. It's great. If
Yeah.
it's adding to their self complexity, it's great. So hobbies are a great way to start. And then just relationships. So maybe choosing a relationship in your life that you want to invest more of your energy and attention in, and you really want to grow here and you want to really improve. And so say, I want to be a better friend. I want to be a better manager. I want to be a better spouse. I want to be a better parent, whatever that is.
Yeah.
So picking a relationship and adding that as one of the identities that you really care about, in addition to whatever other identities you already have, is also a great way to add self-complexity.
Because I know, I read somewhere that you also tied in, you become more emotionally resilient when you are more self-complex. Is that inaccurate? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's really, again, this metaphor of not having all of your eggs in the same basket. So if you break up with someone, but you get a prize for the best pie that you baked during the weekend or whatever,
Yeah.
because you consider yourself a great baker.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you look at the entire week at the kind of like emotional barometer of how you feel, you are going to feel better because you're not going to derive your entire sense of self-worth from one identity.
When I listen to you or read again, what's so special for me is I think I think in layers, and I've learned this about myself because there's always a deeper. I'm always looking at what's underneath, and the things that we've already talked about. Again, through lines in your work is I hear freedom, I feel courage, I see trust. And these are what is your life without this? I actually want to talk to you about self-trust specifically, because I just don't believe that you as in any one of us can ever fully meet your whole self, if we want to call your highest self, your highest potential. Like, how do we ever really know that expression of ourself if we're not moving with trust? And I understand it's not easy, but I'm never selling easy. I'm just, I'd love to know, just when I say self-trust, like what comes to your mind, what comes to your heart? And also, how has the pivot to live the experimental mind and life, like versus like your life before that was more on the linear path, how has that impacted your self-trust?
They're deeply connected, having an experimental mindset and developing self-trust, in the sense that having an experimental mindset is not about trying to feel like you have all of the answers. I think this is where a lot of the suffering comes from, when you try to be in control and then the world is showing you that you're not in control. And then you feel terrible about yourself because you feel like you did something wrong. You're not persistent enough, not resilient enough, not strong enough, not whatever enough.
Yeah.
You're not enough. That's how you feel, right? Whereas when you let go of trying to be in control of everything, but you just say, I'm going to try this thing and I'm going to trust that I can learn from whatever the outcome is, whatever the result. I'm going to look at it from a place of curiosity and self-compassion, and I'm going to study this result and I'm going to learn from it. And so for me, this is where my self-trust comes from now. Not the trust that I will succeed, because I have no idea. I don't even know what success looks like. And I'm frankly not even sure what I want it to look like. So it's not trust that I will get what I want. It's trust that I will show up, I will ask questions, I will explore, and I will be honest with myself, and I will actually look at the result, and I will have this conversation with myself where I ask, what do I like about this? What do I not like about this? What would I do differently next time? And I trust that if I keep on doing this, I'm going to keep on growing. I'm going to keep on evolving. And again, I have no idea what that's going to look like, but I trust that I will keep on figuring it out.
Totally. And that just makes you more of a resilient person as well, right? I mean, because you're already kind of accepting that this idea of whatever failure is, rejection, like any of these things that all of us don't really want to experience, but it's par for the course. Like when you're in life, like we're all gonna face those moments, right? So that trust is really also, strengthening your ability to manage those experiences as well. And almost, you're not just surviving them, but you find a way to thrive, right? Internally, right? From them.
It's really something so basic that it might feel trite to repeat it, but I think it is worth repeating that yes, we don't have a lot of control over what happens around us, what happens in the world, but we do have some control over our response. And so by just being intentional about how you respond, and by creating this sense of trust in your responses, knowing that whatever life throws at you, you will figure it out.
Yeah.
Just by doing that, you will actually figure it out. So it is really about trusting that you will figure it out so you can figure it out.
Totally. It's a muscle, right? You keep flexing it and it gets stronger. I agree. Yes. I did an episode a handful of years ago on this idea of one's purpose. I laugh because okay, let me explain why I'm laughing. Because, so the whole premise of the fucking episode was stop putting so much pressure on yourself. Like, and I say things with conviction, but they're laced with deep compassion because I understand why. And there's so many reasons why. And I understand because I'm also fucking human. I want to share this idea of purpose, my purpose in life with you. And I'd love to talk about, because this is a big part of your work, and I think it's such an important part of your work. So I frame up my life purpose as such, to allow my authentic self to evolve however she wants to evolve in every moment that she wants to evolve, to be devoted to her evolution. So like it or not, if she's like, time to leave that relationship, time to leave this career, time to move out of the city, time to learn this, whatever she wants to do. And it's like, is it a truth for me in my heart? That's my duty. That's my purpose here in life. So it's not this, what is it doing for you? Like this, it's not even altruistic, obviously. It's very, it's about me. But what I have found is that in my devotion to my authentic evolution, I mean, that's why I have this podcast. I'm 8 years deep now, and that was the result of me listening to a curiosity that really developed into a passion I could not ignore. And so, I went for it, right? So that's my interpretation. I'd love for you to.
Everyone had this definition of purpose, I wouldn't have an entire chapter in my book called The Tyranny of Purpose.
Tyranny of Purpose. It's so good.
It's, I think you have a very, very unique way of relating to the entire concept of purpose. I think most people when they think about purpose, they really think about this thing they're supposed to find for themselves. They're supposed to figure out for themselves this thing that gives meaning to their life.
Yeah.
And if they haven't found their purpose yet, their life is not as meaningful compared to the one of someone who has found their purpose. And I think social media has made this a lot worse, because you see a lot of so-called purpose-driven entrepreneurs that are changing the world, that are on a mission. And I really don't think it comes from a bad place. It's just because we've been indoctrinated as a society to say that it's a good thing. You should have a purpose. You should have a mission. And this is what gives your life meaning. And this is what guarantees that you're going to have a positive impact on the world, and that you're going to have a legacy, and that when you're dead, people will remember you, which is ultimately what this is all about. So this is why I have a little bit of a vendetta against purpose, because I feel like a lot of people would be a lot happier if they stopped chasing this unicorn of a purpose that doesn't exist, and instead found purpose in everyday life, in the interactions that they have with other people, in the things they learn, in the questions they ask, in the mistakes that they make when they get up and they try again and they keep on experimenting and iterating and growing and, as you said, evolving.
Yeah.
To me, if that was the definition of purpose that most people had, again, I would have removed that chapter from my book.
No, we need that chapter in there, because this is such a cemented, idea that I agree with you. And I love it. There's so much compassion in your work. And it's really you saying, like, you don't have to suffer. You don't have to drive yourself into this place of, like where you think less of yourself. If I don't have this, then who am I? And really, what am I even doing? What am I worth? And that's really underneath it all. That's what a lot of people carry with them. So I think your entire book serves such great purpose. And actually, it's a beautiful segue. I want to ask you, what was the hardest, 3 questions, hardest part about writing your book, the easiest or funnest part for you in writing the book, and what has been the greatest change in your life since writing your book, since publishing it into the world?
Okay. Hardest part about writing the book. It wasn't actually writing the book itself. It was the title. Finding the title for the book was really, really hard. And so the original title for the book, not many people know this, was Liminal Minds, not Tiny Experiments. And not people, but the reaction most people had when I told them the title was, what? What? So it didn't really work. And it was literally like maybe a month and a half, 6 weeks before the book was going to print, we still didn't have a title. So that was really anxiety inducing. And to the point where, you feel like I'm just going to go with a title that I don't like very much, just because we do need a title. You can't send the book to print without a title.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I'm so happy with the title that I picked. And I ended up picking it in a very experimental way, actually. I made a lot of lists. I sent those lists in my newsletter so people could vote on them. I created fake Facebook ads that I put with fake book covers to see what people would click on and see what they liked. Yes. And so Tiny Experiments was the winner by far. And I love the title now. So that was a very difficult part, which was very surprising to me, because to answer your second question about what was fun, the fun part was the part I thought was going to be hard. So English is not my first language. And so I was actually kind of worried about having to write this entire book in English. But it turns out it was actually really fun. And I really enjoyed the challenge of having to hold all of those different ideas in my mind and connect them together and tell stories, and conducting interviews, asking people to tell me their stories, and trying to then weave those stories in with the research as part of the book. So it's kind of, it's kind of strange. I think it's common in a lot of creative projects, right? What you were terrified about ends up being the most fun part. And the part you thought would be really easy ends up being the one where you end up struggling. So that's what happened here. And
It's so
your
funny.
third question, well, yes. And your third question was about what changed the most in my life since the
Yeah.
book came out, right?
Yep. Yep.
My life has become a lot more, not my personal life, but I've become a lot more public in the sense that I have a much bigger audience now. I'm very, very fortunate that the book is doing really, really well. I've been invited on pretty big podcasts. I've been giving keynotes, lots of things I wasn't doing before. I was just a bit of a nerd on my computer in the lab, working, writing, researching, and reading. And so now I've had this year to be in the world and talk about my work, have conversations, be in front of big audiences, and be on YouTube and all of these kind of things, which has been really interesting because some of it is good in the sense that I actually love having those conversations, and getting this direct feedback from people about your work is such a gift. And there's another side of it, that a bit of a dark side to it, which is that when your audience starts growing, people discover you and your work who have zero background about who you are, your journey. They see a snapshot of you. They make quick judgments. And because they're hiding behind a screen, they feel like they can just post a comment about it. And so
Yeah.
I had a phase of where I had to adapt, and I had to build a sort of kind of digital immune system, because I didn't have that immune system before this year. I didn't have to. I had such a small community, a bunch of people who had been following my journey for years and who knew who I was. And all of a sudden I was on those big channels on YouTube. And the first few weeks, when I started seeing comments about my accent and my appearance and all sorts of things, were actually quite difficult. It's okay now, but it was difficult at first.
No, that's so understandable. It's really hard to be public facing forward. And you know what? And especially when that wasn't your driver. I understand that. I didn't come out and start a podcast and start a personal brand. So, hey, everybody see me. It's like, no, I'm curious. I have conversations I want to have. I want to learn. I want to connect. I want to share, but when, you're putting yourself out there, and it's so not easy. And I love what you just said, to build, I've never heard that before. So this is definitely your thing, but a digital immune system. I think that's so fucking valuable, cause I've gone viral before. So, and I will say that, the experience for me was actually it was incredible in a very positive way, because there was so much, the feedback was just really, it was very loving, and thank you, thank you, thank you. But, obviously the more that you grow, it's not going to stay like that, right? Because people will be people, humans will be humans. One thing that I do want to have in this conversation, because I think it was so valuable. You did a TEDx talk, and there was a moment where your mind blinked out, and you're in front of, what was it, over 800 people. And I think so.
Yeah.
A couple of things. I love what you did. So when I speak public, like, it's you, and I'm not teaching, it's like I'm channeling, right? And there are many moments where I have to pause and let whatever wants to come through, but that creates a space, and that space is public, right? So I just always go hand on heart and kind of get quiet and let whatever, but that's like, it can be very uncomfortable, right? But this is why I want to share this with you, because and I'd love for you to talk about this. When I read your response in that moment, so again, I'm the girl who deep layers thinking, and what's the undertone and what's happening. What I saw, or what I read, is a woman who trusts herself and who has created a strong connection with herself. I'm not saying it was fucking comfortable for you. I'd actually like to hear you speak about it. Maybe it was no big deal. Maybe I don't know, but I'm just sharing my interpretation. When I read your response is you got quiet, you went in and you let whatever needed to come through. I'd love for you to share that. And the comments, by the way, just for everybody to know, like it was so beautiful to read some of those comments because you really, again, and this is a through line in your work, is you're really giving people permission to be fucking human. You're like the exhale, but your exhale is not just this like healing exhale. It's actually invigorating. It's inviting. It's inspiring. And I think it's so, I speak from my heart, girl. Like I'm no fucking bullshit. Like this is it's a truth for me in terms of how I interpret you and your work. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you're right that I think one of my favorite things with what happened after I shared, and then I'll answer the first part of your question, but quite a few people ended up sharing their own stories of blanking out on stage, which a lot of them said, I had never shared that before because who shares that, right? I failed on stage. Why would I then post about it? And the fact that I posted about it, a lot of people actually shared that. And I just loved how it made it, again, it's all about making it visible. It made it visible that it happens all the time. And the person that at the TEDx, one of the person on the team told me that it was something like 30 or 40% of talks that they uploaded to the platform where they had to cut a huge blank in the middle, but nobody sees that on the YouTube version, on the TED.com version, because it's all edited before it's being uploaded. And so anyone who watches those talks online or who's considering maybe at some point in their life giving a talk because they have an interesting idea to share with the world will compare themselves to that edited version and think that this is literally, I never thought about it this way. So thanks for asking this question. But this is the equivalent of when we were teenagers and looking at Photoshopped like photos of models and thinking that we had to look like that. It's the equivalent for public speaking, basically. So I was really happy that it created those conversations. And in terms of how I felt on stage, for me, that was probably the most valuable aspect of this experience is that before this happened, this was my worst public speaking nightmare. Forgetting what I was going to say next and just blanking out like this on stage. This was the thing that would keep me up at night before a talk. And then it happened. It actually happened for the first time in my life. And it was okay. It was fine. I felt really calm, actually. And I almost felt like I was held by the audience, that we were in this together and just waiting for the words to come back and that they were waiting with me.
Yeah, what an unforgettable experience, and not just for you, but for everybody in that audience too. You know, I think that is again, I think in that moment, if I was sitting there and if I was watching that unfold, I would totally be like inside, like, come on, girl, you got it. Like, I feel like that's probably what the audience was doing. Cause we all know it. I mean, it takes so much guts to just stand on a stage and to speak, period, but especially to deliver an idea and to do it in a timely fashion. And so, I love that you shared that experience with the world. I have a TEDx talk in the work, so I will think of you if that happens to me.
Yeah, and again, they edit. I asked them to leave it in, and they told me they weren't sure they could do that. So I'm going to see when it goes live if they kept the actual unedited version or not. But they cut it, and also even people in the audience. I had lots of people come and see me afterwards and say that it was their favorite talk because it felt like it was the most authentic and human of all because of this moment. And so in a way, I genuinely think that the fact that this happened made my talk better. The talk, in a very meta way, was also about embracing imperfection and embracing the fact that things don't always go to plan. And then this
That's
happens. So,
amazing.
yeah.
It was very on brand. It was like,
Oh, yes. In a very,
that's
yeah,
amazing.
unplanned way. I even had someone after the talk who came to see me and asked if that was planned, if that was part of what I was going to do. And I said, no, I'm not an actor. I definitely, that was not planned.
Was that strategy? That was brilliant. That's amazing. Well, shit. I hope TED keeps it in. I don't know if it fits their format, but at least it's, out here we've spoken about it. Thank you. I'm so glad that I brought this into the conversation because I truly felt like that was just such a powerful experience, and then for you to share it. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So a couple more questions. What is, because we're talking about questions, is there a question that is really, um, that really has a hold of you right now in your life? Something that you're contemplating on, maybe philosophizing with, like in the laboratory with? Is there a question that feels pretty
um,
substantial to you right now?
yeah, it's going to sound a little bit metaphysical, but I'm thinking a lot right now about what feels alive. Um, we did talk about that a little bit in our conversation today, but about how I had really an amazing year, lots of opportunities. And I am now in this phase of digestion, processing, and
Yeah.
reflection, and
Mhm.
really asking myself, okay, what feels alive in the position of privilege I'm in right now, where I have so many different opportunities? What actually feels alive? And I'm really trying to make decisions from. I'm I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, so for me, it feels very natural to think about things in a very above the neck kind of way,
Yep.
very rational, very
Totally.
logical. And this is why it's
Yeah.
very important that I try to make decisions also in a more embodied way. And what feels alive, that's what this question is about. It's really about asking myself, but what feels good? What is something that feels energizing? Even if rationally that might not be the decision that makes the most sense on paper, what feels alive?
Mhm. That's beautiful. It's so good. And it speaks to my heart. I mean, I have so much respect for the mind. If I'm going to take astrologically, I'm a fucking double Gemini. We are all about analytical thinking, logical. But I am such a, in fact, I feel like this is part of what my soul came to do, is to speak on behalf of the heart, because I feel like
Mm.
the heart has its own intelligence. And the idea for me is, how do we allow the mind and the heart to really be in a powerful, empowering relationship with each other? So, because a lot of things I've done in my life didn't look right on paper. Like, it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? But what I felt in my heart. So this is one of my quotes: you can't make a wrong move when you make a true move. And those are the only moves that come from the heart. You can't make a wrong
Mm.
move when you make a true move. And those are the only moves that come from the heart. And so, for me, it's always been about, what's a true move for you in this moment, right? Because things are always changing, right? And so
Yeah.
I really love I love the aliveness, because I mean, that's what we came here to do, right? We came here to be alive, not just go through the fucking motions, but to actually taste life. And in that, to, I think, really just discover more of, our true self and our essence. And I think that's just so, it's so beautiful what you shared. And I'm so looking forward to more of everything that you're putting out into the world. I'm in your community, um, online Nest Labs. So I get your newsletter. I'm in there. I haven't done a tiny experiment publicly yet, but it's fun for me to see it come through, and in the community. And I'm really looking forward to staying connected with you and to really just discovering more of what comes through you into the world.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks for all of the kind words. It's easy to come up with interesting answers when someone asks good questions. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. That's a big compliment to me. I appreciate you. So let's guide everybody to your newsletter. I mean, all the things are in the show notes, but where do we take them to come and be in your world?
I would say two main places to go. The first one is my newsletter. It's at nestlabs.com. And if you enter your email there, I send a newsletter every Thursday about a lot of the topics we discussed today. And the second place would be probably Instagram is a good place. Also, I'm at Neuranne, Neuranne. And same, I talk about self-anthropology and curiosity and designing your life in a way that makes sense and keeps on evolving.
Beautiful. And everybody needs to get your book. You were on my favorite book list.
I need to be
really
better
think
at
it's
that.
one of
Thank
those
you.
books.
Read my book, please.
Yeah. I got you, girl. It's very genuine. So it's easy for me to talk about your book and to gift your book. Tis the season, it's the holidays. So, and Lord, thank you so much. Again, I know it's the end of your day, and I just really appreciate the time with you, connecting with you. And I look forward to more conversations and more curiosity with you.